So I'm going to break it down into three portions, inshallah. So we'll do 1/3 today, inshallah, and the next coming weeks we'll go over the rest of the surah as well. The introduction to the surah, it is a Makki surah. It is disputed whether or not it was revealed in Mecca or in Medina, and that is because of the reason of revelation or the sabab nuzul of this ayah. And let's mention the next three points, the different times that the Prophet ﷺ used this surah as a reply to a question. But it was revealed initially in the early Meccan period, and it was used just like what these different narrations tell us is that he used this surah, or he replied to questions with this surah at different times. So the first time when the Quraysh had said to the Prophet ﷺ, "Unsub lana rabbak," that give us the ancestry of your Lord, right? Because again, in their mind, everything is based on who does a person belong to, and so on and so forth. So they thought, out of their ignorance, that there is a nasab or an ancestry to whoever the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is talking about. So they said, "Unsub lana rabbak," tell us the ancestry of your Lord. And then the surah came down, and the Prophet ﷺ recited to them Surah Al-Ikhlas, which we know what it basically talks about, the concept of Tawheed, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being one, and of having no children, and not giving birth, and not being born, so on and so forth, meaning there is no such thing as ancestry when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another narration, Amr ibn Tufayl said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "What do you call us to?" So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, "To Allah." And then he said, "Describe him for me. Is he made of gold or silver or iron?" In another narration he said, "Is he made of wood?" So again, Amr ibn Tufayl at this point in time was somebody who was again ignorant, and the prevailing ideology at that time was of idol worship. So different idols were made from different materials. So he wanted to know, what is what is Allah made of, right? Is he made of iron, gold, silver, wood, or anything else? So again, this surah came down, and the Prophet ﷺ read this surah to him as a response. And this is why some of the people say it was in the Madani phase, when some of the Jewish leaders came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they asked him about Allah, and they said, "Well, what gender is he? Who did he inherit the world from? And who will inherit the world after him?" So whatever their ideology or their theology had evolved into at that time, they were asking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these different ways. So this surah that we have, Surah Al-Ikhlas, is the definition of our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And in very, very few words. We have a very, very simple theology, alhamdulillah. So it's not complicated like some other theologies, there are too many gods, and who is the God for this or the God for that. It's not a complicated thing to understand when you have a Trinity, for example, very difficult thing to explain, but it's a very simple theology because it's a very logical and rational theology as well. Some of the names of this surah, we know the surah Al-Ikhlas, I misspelled it here I think, Al-Ikhlas, which means making something sincere, right? Making yourself or making something sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a title because there's no, unlike other surahs, we talked about Al-Fil, Quraysh, Al-Ma'un, right? These are titles given based on words that are in the surah. So Al-Ikhlas, the word is not in the surah, but it's a title given to the surah as well, based on the contents, not because it's a word in the surah. The Prophet ﷺ himself referred to it as Surah Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad. Again, the first ayah of every surah is commonly used as a title for the surah. Some other names, Imam Al-Razi, Fakhruddin Al-Razi in his Tafsir Al-Kabir, he gives about 20-something names for this surah. And these are all titles that are given to it based on the content that it has. So it's called At-Tawheed, which means being, making something one. So obviously because it talks about Allah being one. It's called Al-Asas, or the foundation of something, particularly because Tawheed, or the oneness of Allah, is the foundation of our theology. It's called Al-Muqashqisha. Now there was another surah we talked about that was called Al-Muqashqisha. I'm going to quiz you now. Anyone remember the surah that was called Al-Muqashqisha? These are names that are not commonly referred to. Surah Al-Kafirun. Surah Al-Kafirun was called Al-Muqashqisha because it means the cure. The cure, right? And cure from the sickness of shirk. So this is also called Al-Muqashqisha. Another name is given to the surah. It's called As-Samad because Allahu Samad, right? It comes in the second ayah of this surah. And again, like we mentioned, there are many names. All that means is that the surah can be described in many different ways. All of it pointing back to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one and is all powerful, or something of that nature. So based on what we narrated about the questions that the Prophet ﷺ received, in the response to which he got the surah, you can get an idea of what were some of the beliefs that existed at that time of the Prophet ﷺ. So there was the polytheistic, the pagan belief, right? The belief in many gods, that their idols were made from some type of substance, and that gods had a form and a shape, and they believed in both female gods and goddesses. And one particular thing is that sacrifices were also made to these idols or these gods, right? So sacrifices were made, the thought that this god needs to eat, so they refer to it as feeding, right? Sacrificing the animal, leaving the meat for this quote-unquote god to eat from. So this is a polytheistic, paganistic belief that existed at that time. With the Jews, they had described Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, but they had described him with human-like qualities. Right? In their scriptures, if you look, they describe them with more human-like qualities, that he's walking on the earth, he wrestled with somebody, and things like that. So he was described with human-like qualities, and they also claimed, some of them, that Allah had taken, a son, and that was, they said, وَقَالُوا عُزَيْرُ ibn Allah. They said that Uzair is the son of Allah. With the Christians as well, obviously they believe in the Trinity. Allah mentions in the Quran, وَلَا تَقُولُوا ثَلَاثَةً, don't say three or Trinity. They also claim that Allah Azza wa Jal had a son, which was Isa alayhi salam. And they also, some of them claim that he had a mother, and there are some other sects and beliefs as well about them. The Zoroastrians, or the fire worshippers at that time, they believed in two different types of powers, right? The good and the evil. The good was embodied in light, and the evil is embodied by darkness, right? So they believed in these two things. And there were also the Sabians who believed that the stars had something to do with what happens in the world, right? So they believed that the stars had a direct influence in the things that are happening in this world. So obviously they gave the stars certain powers or certain attributes, which we only give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which kind of gives you a warning about, how to treat certain things that come up, right? When people try to read the stars, or what is your star, things like that. Just be careful with that and what you're getting into. So this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that mentions that Surah Al-Ikhlas is 1/3 of the Quran. عن أبي سعيد أن رجلا سمع رجلا يقرأ قل هو الله أحد يرددها فلما أصبح جاء إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فذكر ذلك له وكأن الرجل يتقالها أي يراها قليلا فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والذي نفسي بيده إنها لتعدل ثلث القرآن. A man heard another man reciting the surah in the morning, and the next morning, at night or the next morning, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and informed him about it, as if he thought it was not enough to recite in salah. So he downplayed it a little bit. He said maybe that's not. He's just reading a surah, Al-Ikhlas. He's reading a short surah. And the Prophet ﷺ, then he replied. He said, "By him in whose hand is my life, swearing by Allah, this surah is equal to 1/3 of the Quran. 1/3 of the Quran." This is narrated in the Bukhari and Muslim. I forgot to mention that here. Now, what does that mean? There's another hadith that mentions the same thing, that it's equal to 1/3 of the Quran. So what does it mean it's equal to 1/3 of the Quran? There's an important point to understand. There's a difference in the Arabic words jaza and ijza, right? Which is the concept here. Jaza means you're getting a reward for something, and ijza means you're satisfying a condition, you're fulfilling something, you're meeting a need, right? And so there's a difference here in how people look at this hadith of Surah Al-Ikhlas is 1/3 of the Quran. So you're basically getting the reward as if you had read 1/3 of the actual Quran. That's the amount of reward you get for reading this surah, or for loving this surah and reciting this surah. But this surah does not equal, in a literal sense, 1/3 of the Quran. And an example of that, some of the ulama, they say that if you make an oath, right? If you make an oath that if I do this, then I will read 1/3 of the Quran, right? And then you end up doing it, and then you feel sorry, now you have to read 1/3 of the Quran. Well, you can't just read, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ, the surah, and then consider yourself, you've fulfilled your oath. No, you have to read the actual 1/3 portion of the Quran, because that's what you swore to do, right? So it doesn't take over that need, it doesn't fill that need or satisfy that need that needs to be met, but it will give you the reward equivalent to reading 1/3 of the Quran. Also, if you believe that it was enough that if you read Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times in your salah, technically you would have read the whole Quran, so you would have read Fatiha, right? So you can develop some weird ideas from if you accept it as it's actually equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran. So it means you get the reward of reading as if you read 1/3 of the actual Quran. That's how much you get in reward. It also refers to one other important thing that some of the Mufassirin have pointed out, that every single ayah in the Quran falls under 3 major categories. It's either talking about one of 3 things, and that is either the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nature of Allah Azza wa Jal, or Tawheed, or what our beliefs about Allah. It's either talking about prophethood, right? You have the stories of the prophets, the examples of the prophets, what they went through, and so on and so forth, or the reality that Allah chooses people and sends them with a message. And it talks about the hereafter, the akhirah, right? The fact that people will die and will be raised after their death, they will be judged, there will be heaven, there will be hell, all of these things. So these are the three main topics that the entire Quran talks about. No matter what you're reading from the Quran, one of these three things is being highlighted, or all of them being highlighted at the same time. And if you think about this when you read the Quran, you can actually categorize it. You can categorize it, right? So this surah is specifically talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how it's equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran, because 1/3 of the message of the Quran is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His reality, His nature, His attributes, and so on and so forth. So that is one of the ways to understand this hadith, that the Surah Al-Ikhlas is 1/3 of the Quran. So we get into the first ayah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد. Say He is Allah, Ahad, one and only. Right? So we're going to focus on just the first part here. Say that He is Allah. So Allah is a name that was known to the Arabs at the time. Specifically, the pagans themselves, they knew who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was. So they recognized that Allah Azza wa Jal was the creator, He was the sustainer, He was somebody that provided them, and these types of things. They believed in this. And there are some ayat that mention this, particularly in Surah Al-Zukhruf. Allah says, وَلَئِنْ سَأَلْتَهُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَهُمْ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهُ فَأَنَّ يُؤْفَكُونَ. And He's saying to the Prophet ﷺ, if you ask them who created them, they would surely say Allah. So how are they deluded? Right? They recognize that the creator was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another group of ayat in Surah Al-Mu'minun, Allah says, قُلْ لِمَنِ الْأَرْضِ وَمَنْ فِيهَا إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ سَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّهِ قُلْ أَفَلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ قُلْ مَنْ رَبُّ السَّمَوَاتِ السَّبْعِ وَرَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْعَظِيمِ سَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّهِ قُلْ أَفَلَا تَتَّقُونَ قُلْ مَنْ بِيَدِهِ مَلَكُوتُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ يُجِيرُ وَلَا يُجَارُ عَلَيْهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ سَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّهِ قُلْ فَأَنَّى تُسْحَرُونَ. Right? Say, O Muhammad sallallahu to whom belongs, say to them, to whom belongs the earth and whoever is in it, or whatever is in it, if you should really know. They will say to Allah. Then say, then will you not remember? Say, who is the Lord of the seven heavens and the Lord of the throne? The Rabb. Rabb specifically means the one who creates, the one who provides, the one who maintains and sustains everything. So who is the Rabb of the seven heavens and the Rabb of the great throne? They will say, they belong to Allah. Say, then will you not fear Him? And then you ask them, in whose hand is the realm of all things? The kingdom belongs to who? He protects while no one else can protect against Him, if you should know. They will say, all of this belongs to Allah. Then say, then how are you deluded? How are you deluded? Again, why did they recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time they're considered mushrikeen? It's because of this, that they're aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they gave certain acts of worship to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To those idols that they had made out of wood or iron or silver or gold or whatever. Certain aspects of worship they gave to them, and the excuse they gave was, no, that's not the excuse they gave. The excuse they gave was, okay, I don't have it. Yeah, this is the excuse they gave. أَلَا لِلَّهِ دِينُ الْخَالِصُ وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. Allah says that unquestionably for Allah is the pure religion. And those who take protectors besides Him, awliya besides Him, their excuse is what? مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We only worship them so that they may bring us closer to Allah. Right? So they recognize Allah is the creator, but then they've come up with all these idols. Why? Because the common theme of when people track away from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what? We are not good enough to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We have to have an intermediary. And if you kind of look at some of the other religions, this is the point that's kind of highlighted, right? In Christianity, you have somebody that has to die for your sins, right? So you pray through a portion of one of the three who came to the earth. In the paganism that existed here, well, we make dua to them, we sacrifice to them, so that they can bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is, in essence, this is what shirk is. This is what associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really is. So just recognizing that Allah is there, acknowledging that Allah creates, acknowledging that He is the one that has the power to make everything, that is not enough. Acts of worship have to be given only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And that's where the word ahad comes into this ayah. That He is Allah, you know who He is, and He is ahad, meaning He is the only one that deserves any of your worship, any act of worship whatsoever. He is the only one. There's a difference between saying He is wahid, right? In and of Himself, Allah is wahid, He's not two, He's not three. But ahad means the one and only. Nothing else on the face of this earth either deserves worship or nothing else is like Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the limiting factor, right? So this is how the Prophet ﷺ is describing. Who is your Lord? Who do you believe in? We believe in Allah, the one who creates, sustains, maintains, and He is ahad, He is alone in that, and therefore worship belongs only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how the concept of Tawheed is defined in Islam. That there are mainly three aspects. The ulama have kind of given us three aspects of Tawheed. Number one, that Allah is the one who creates, sustains, provides, maintains, orders, commands. All of these things, they belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because He is the only one that does all of this, therefore the right to be worshipped only belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Submission only belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything else is created. Only the Creator deserves worship and true submission, true obedience in the complete sense. And the third aspect of it, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also has unique names and attributes that are unlike anything that exists. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Allah says about Himself in the Quran, there is absolutely nothing that is similar to Him, nothing that is like Him, which is also the last ayah of this surah, similar to that. Yet He is as-Sami' and al-Basir, right? He hears and He sees, but there is nothing that is like Him. So He has unique attributes, unique names that only belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the basic belief about the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal is that we accept them, right? We accept them as they are, but we don't think about how they exist. We don't think about how they exist because we can never know how they exist. How does Allah hear? How does Allah see? We have no idea of knowing that. But Allah says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. He is unlike, and there's nothing like Him, yet He hears everything and He sees everything. So this tawheed is embodied in the concept of La ilaha illallah. Right? When we say قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, then it's also reflected when we say the shahada, La ilaha illallah. That there is nothing worthy of worship, no ilah, except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this statement also has certain conditions. So if we believe قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, then there are certain conditions that have to be met as well. The first and foremost is knowledge, then certainty. Knowledge means you have to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. And Allah commands us in the Quran when He says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. Know that Allah Azza wa Jal, that there is none worthy of worship, no, there's no ilah except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ, and then seek forgiveness for your sin. Right? So basically you have to have knowledge before you can practice anything. So this is the first and foremost condition. We have to know this. And there's an interesting hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that he says, مَنْ مَاتَ وَهُوَ يَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ. Whoever dies and he knows, he has in his knowledge that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, he will enter Jannah, that he will enter paradise. And we're going to see what the correct understanding of this hadith is towards the end from some of the students of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ himself. Right? Whoever dies and he knows that La ilaha illallah, he will enter Jannah, but this is not the only condition. Right? This is not the only. There are other texts that we have as well that make up more conditions as well. The second condition for tawheed in Allah, for actualizing this correct belief, is to have certainty. Meaning you know, but a lot of times we can be doubtful. Right? Sometimes we know some things, but there's an element of doubt. Right? And people go through this as a natural phase in their relationship, in their spiritual life as well. Right? They go through a phase where they're very sure of everything, and then they have periods of doubt. Right? But certainty is something that has to be there when it comes to knowing that Allah is one. When Allah is one, there's no other, no one else worthy of worship except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah mentions in the Quran, He says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا. The believers are only those who are the ones who have believed in Allah and His Messenger. They accept Allah and His Messenger. ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا. Then they do not doubt. Then they don't doubt in the fact that Allah is one, that Muhammad is His Messenger, right? And those are and Iman and belief goes back to these two things. These are the two things that keep us grounded in our Iman. And also truthfulness and honesty, they list them as separate conditions. I included them under certainty because if you have knowledge and you're certain, you have to be honest in your expression of it and truthful in the way you practice it as well. Another condition is acceptance. Now you can know that Allah is one, you can be certain that Allah is one, and you can choose to reject. Right? And this is the term, kafir means somebody who rejects. Right? So you can know something is true, and yet you can still reject it, and you can choose not to practice it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا إِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. And indeed, He describing some of the disbelievers, when it was said to them, there is no ilah, there is no deity but Allah, they were arrogant. Meaning they understood it, they believed it, but they were arrogant. وَيَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَتَارِكُ آلِهَتَنَا لِشَاعِرٍ مَجْنُونَ. And they said, are we going to leave our gods for a bad poet? Meaning, should we leave these who, we worship all these, but should we leave them because we don't like this person? Why should we do what he says, right? So the arrogance that came out from them as well. And the example of this from the story of Musa alayhi salam with Fir'aun, right? Fir'aun, لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا you know that there is no deity except Allah. Fir'aun knew it in and of himself, but he chose to reject and not accept. So acceptance is a part of Tawheed, and with acceptance comes submission, right? So when you accept that, yes, I accept it, this is real, this is true, now I have to submit. Meaning when Allah tells me to do something, I need to do it. When He tells me to stay away from something, I need to stay away from it. When His messenger says something, it's important, right? I should give importance to those things. So submission is an important condition. Also sincerity and love. And one of the things Allah mentions about sincerity, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ and they are not commanded except that they should worship Allah, being sincere to Him in religion. And we'll see that when you understand sincerity when you see the opposite of Tawheed, which is shirk, and we'll get just a couple slides on shirk as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ حَرَمَ عَلَى النَّارِ مَنْ قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ يَبْتَغِي بِذَلِكَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it haram, prohibited on the hellfire to take anyone who said La ilaha illallah sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sincerely believes in La ilaha illallah, sincerely said La ilaha illallah, the hellfire will be haram for this person. But again, it's not the only condition, right? We have the submission, the acceptance, all of that is part of the sincerity that's there as well. And also love, right? Loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having this desire for Allah azza wa jal. Allah mentions the Quran, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ وَيَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ and yet among the people are those who take other than Allah as equals. Sharik, right? They take others as andad or equals to Him. They love them as they should love Allah. But those who believe are stronger in their love for Allah. Now don't misunderstand this ayah, right? They're loving these false gods as they should love Allah, but the believers love Allah even more than they actually should love Allah, right? So the believers have this immense love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The immense love for the fact that He is the only one that creates and sustains and gives and provides. So out of the love for Him, we seek Him and seek to worship Him as well. So this was some of the conditions that are mentioned. Now those hadith that say that whoever says La ilaha illallah will enter Jannah, whoever says La ilaha illallah sincerely will enter Jannah. It was said to Al-Hasan al-Basri. Al-Hasan al-Basri is the student of the likes of Ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, student of many of the Sahaba, right? So he came after the generation of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. He was born in the last 2 years of the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu. And it is narrated that Umar radiallahu anhu made a dua for him as well, right? To increase him in knowledge and these types of things. But Al-Hasan al-Basri is a student of the companions. And he's explaining to us some of his hadith. So it was said to him, whoever says La ilaha illallah will enter paradise. And then he said, with adding an explanation, he said, whoever says it and fulfills its rights and obligations will enter paradise. So this is not somebody, later on making things up. This is a student of the companions with a deep understanding of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, saying that whoever says it, yes, but you have to fulfill the rights and obligations that come with it, meaning all the other conditions. You have to have the acceptance, you have to have the submission, right? You have to have the certainty. All of these things have to be a part of it. Also, Wahb ibn Munabbih, also from the Tabi'een, he said to the one who asked him, isn't La ilaha illallah the key to paradise, the key to Jannah? Something beautiful. He said, indeed, however, keys have teeth. You know how keys have the teeth ingrained into it? It says the keys have teeth ingrained into them. So if you bring a key that has the teeth engraved into them, the right teeth, the doors will be open for you. But if you just show up with a key that's empty, you go to the minute key, the thing in Walmart or the Publix, right? You can make a key by yourself. They have this empty key that the teeth have to be carved into. So you're saying if you can come with the key, you can say I believe in Allah, but you can bring the key, but if it doesn't have all the teeth that are carved into it, the doors will not be open for you. Right? So just because you have the key doesn't mean you're in. Right? You have to work hard and you have to fulfill the rights and the obligations, and then you earn all those teeth on the key, and then you will be granted entry into Jannah bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us all amongst the dwellers in paradise, inshallah. Along with understanding Tawheed now comes Ibadah. Because what we're saying is, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. He is Allah the One. So in and of Himself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that deserves worship. So what is worship? Right? What is worship composed of? What is it that we're giving to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not giving to any other thing besides Allah azza wa jalla? And that is Ibadah. And Ibadah is basically anything that is pleasing to Allah of words, deeds, whether they are apparent or unapparent. Right? So the things that you say, the things that you do, either they're apparent, meaning other people can see them, or they're inside yourself, inside your heart. So you can make dhikr to where other people can hear you when you're reciting Quran, or you can make dhikr in your heart and you can make dhikr to yourself. Right? The salah that you perform is apparent, it's a visible show of ibadah, but having the certainty in your heart that Allah is there, He's watching you, that is something that's hidden. and that you're not showing other people as well. So all of these types of things are considered ibadah, right? And we know that in a broader sense, anything you intend to do for the sake of Allah can be considered an act of worship if it is permissible to do. And ibadah is made of two major components. The first one, sincerity. You're doing it sincerely for the sake of Allah. If you're not, then it's out of the circle of tawheed. Now it goes in the circle of shirk, or associating partners with Allah. So it has to be done only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it can be considered ibadah. And it also has to conform to the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning it has to be according to the kitab and the sunnah. The book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If it's not, then this is where you have the issue of something we know, the sunnah versus the bid'ah, you have innovations in religion. So, if Allah tells us to pray 5 times a day, simple example, you've heard this many times, we have to pray 4 rak'at for dhuhr, 4 rak'at for asr, but if you decide on your own, I want to pray 5, I want to pray 6, I want to pray 3, right? This is not allowed, because you have to be sincere for the sake of Allah, and you have to conform and agree with the teachings of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's a principle to remember when it comes to acts of worship. Nothing is allowed. When it comes to worship, there is nothing allowed. Everything is haram, everything is prohibited, except that which has been made permissible, right? In acts of worship. In acts outside of worship, it's the opposite. So everything is allowed except for that which has been made prohibited. So for example, financial transactions, things like that, every financial transaction is allowed except for those which have been made prohibited, like riba and cheating and all these kinds of things. But in worship, it's the other way. Nothing is allowed except that which has been made permissible. So we can't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can't pray our salah in any way that we want. It has to be done based on the conformity with the sunnah, the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And just to finish it off, inshallah, we'll stop here, we're running out of time. Shirk is now the opposite of tawheed. So we're trying to understand what tawheed is. We're trying to understand قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, that Allah is one. He deserves all worship. He deserves our ibadah because He is the one that creates and sustains. So the opposite of that is obviously shirk, right? And that's giving anything that's the right of Allah to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to associate others with Allah in those things that only Allah does, or they only belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's two types, just quickly, there's two types of shirk. There's major shirk, which makes somebody no longer a Muslim, right? This is something that is a difference between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, right? A Muslim is somebody who does not engage in major shirk. And things of major shirk are obvious, granting worship to other than, or others along with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So either worshipping completely somebody else besides Allah, worshipping somebody alongside Allah, dividing it up and things like that, assigning many gods and all this stuff, all of this is considered major shirk. And believing that anyone else does what only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, this is something that we have to be careful of. No, nobody else creates, Allah creates. Nobody else provides, Allah provides. Allah sustains, Allah gives, is the answer to our du'as, right? We don't make du'a to anyone except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are kind of the things that fall under major shirk, right? Major association with Allah. And then there's a minor shirk, which you don't become a disbeliever if you perform these acts, but they greatly reduce the reward of the acts that you're doing. And they can give you sin as well. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّ أَخْوَفَ مَا أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ الشِّرْكُ الْأَصْغَرُ, that the most fearful thing that I fear for you is the minor shirk, this minor association with Allah. So قَالُوا يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَمَا الشِّرْكُ الْأَصْغَرُ, what is this minor shirk? قَالَ الرِّيَاء, he said this is showing off, الرِّيَاء, right? And showing off basically means when you're doing something not completely for the sake of Allah, and there's somebody else that's involved in it. So you're dividing up your worship now. Now even though you're worshipping only Allah, it's not major shirk. You're worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the way you're doing it, you're involving somebody else or something else as a part of it. An example of that is somebody who is, for example, they're praying. And they're praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not praying to other than Allah. They're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if they want to make their prayer look good for somebody else, now they've given a portion of that ibadah, right? They've divided up. They've given a portion of what they're supposed to be doing purely for the sake of Allah. They're dividing it up now for this person. Because I want to make sure that he sees me or he's watching me, so I want to make it look better. I want to make it look nicer. Now the ibadah becomes divided. You're still worshipping only Allah, so it's not major shirk. But because you're not doing it purely for the sake of Allah, it becomes minor shirk, right? And this is forgivable. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for any of these instances that we have in our lives. But we have to be aware of the fact that this happens. Right? This happens to all of us. And the Prophet said that this is what is most fearful. I'm most fearful of this because this is very easy to fall into. Right? That means it's all of us can fall into this without even being cognizant of this fact. So obviously, whenever we perform acts of worship, these types of things should remind us that we need to focus ourselves, right? And that's how we also don't lose track of what we're doing. A lot of times we're praying, we lose track of how many raka'at or what we're praying in the first place. We're not fully focused on the salah anyways. So if we take a little bit of time just to say in our heads, remind ourselves, I need to do this for Allah, and then you start in that act of worship, then inshallah at least you have reminded yourself from, to stay away from riyah, or if it comes up, you can, refocus yourself and put yourself back in place. So these are the two types of shirk. We'll stop here inshallah. Time is up. If there are any questions or comments or discussion points, inshallah we can take them. So what are the two surahs called Al-Muqashqisha? Please. This surah, Al-Ikhlas and Al-Kafirun, alhamdulillah. Yeah. These are names that are other names that are given, lesser known names that are given to these surahs. Yeah. Any questions? Or going once, going twice? خلاص sold inshallah. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. Everybody's hungry. I want to go home and eat.
Sleep.
So,